Welcome to Happening Multicultural Festival 2022. Um, Before we go any further, I would like to take a few minutes for the land acknowledgement. I recognize that I live and work in traditional indigenous territories, and I acknowledge that I'm currently located on the traditional territory of Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth for the resources we are using, and I would like to honor all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on the land since the time immemorial. Happening Multicultural Festival is the first and only Toronto-based festival created by community artists, giving center stage to newcomer, immigrant, and refugee artists. During Happening Poetry Nights, we celebrate poets who, among other things, identify as newcomers, refugees, or immigrants. Every Thursday in May 2022, there will be a poetry event with three readings or performances, as well as one interview. Despite the fact that poetry inhabits many geographical locations and speaks in different languages and accents, literature continues to be the most exclusive of arts and the most resistant against outsiders. My name is Bänoo, and I'm the poet curator of the series. It is now my pleasure to introduce the poets for tonight. Our first poet of tonight is Hazrat Wahriz. Hazrat Wahriz graduated from the Pyatigorsk Linguistic University in Russia. He took on various jobs: journalism, teaching, translating, and even worked as a diplomat in Moscow and Seoul. Hazrat settled in Canada in 2013. He's currently teaching, planning, and performing programs for Afghan children. His books, authored or translated, have been published in Persian, Russian, and Japanese in Russia, Afghanistan, Iran, and Japan.
Hello, this is Hazrat Wahriz, a poet originally from Afghanistan based in Canada. Poems that I'm reading for you are originally in Farsi and translated by Saika Wali from Farsi into English. It was too hard for me to find one poem that long enough for 10-12 minutes, but I was advised to read several poems, but for 10-12 minutes. Mainly I write haiku and short poems, but I've found something that is long. Student of linguistics, Latin, and the charming phenomena that no longer exists. Dium spiro spero, omnia mi comporto. With no season to call it my favorite, with no favorite color, and a drink that above all is. With a farewell to the dream of making Mars habitable, and those distant wishes that only he knew of, and the millstone over his soul, man crossed the bridges of commitments, desires, of a friendship greater than all, of an earth happier than this, bridges of sodality, friendship, comradeship, and bridges of making promises, hand, hate, heart. He returned heartbroken from every direction and every place, and accepted that life imprisoned in oneself is called fate. And one has to cope with the impossible in life. Disconsolately he goes on about life, inside the thick walls of loneliness, thicker than the desire of holding your beloved for a long time in your arm. No, enough of that. What is important is that suddenly you arrive with no ritual, with not even a trace of concern about a misunderstanding. Do you see my cowardice? You, and only you, not a woman, a person from A to Z, from your lovely long hair to your toned gowns, you, and those lips that are suddenly more familiar with the joy of kissing than that of a heavenly memory, and to your kindness that taunts the farce existence of the houris. You have to be real. You just have to be, you know. Without you, life is nothing but a senseless continuation of the Big Bang. And I'm not the mere continuation of any senseless coincidence. I'm the continuation of a journey that is destined to end in your arms. However far it may be, or impossible, or even never, no, never can ever be that far from happening. You happened. In March 2001, the Taliban terrorist group destroyed statues of Buddha in Bamiyan province, Afghanistan. This poem is dedicated to that event. Once again, the enemy raises his flag with the sound of a victory trumpet high above the last trench, my trench. Once again, and as it has been for centuries, I am from the most often defeated race in history. I wear a comforting smile of trust, like the one that Buddha had on his lips in Baba Mountains when enemies from the Gog and Magog tribes blew him to pieces. In the last 5 decades, spring used to bring only unhappiness, a distraction to my country, to the people I belong to. This poem's about the sad spring of 1992 when Mujahideen captured Kabul. There was a flower in your hand as you were walking through the ruins in the alley. It didn't matter who gave you the flower. It didn't matter that we were separated. What mattered is that my heart shattered from the ravage the flower field had to endure. My God, spring was really here recently? Darkness has spread in alleys so as if inside the steel chest of a clock a heart has died. And on the wall calendar there is no today, no tomorrow, just tonight. Hazaras believe that Banis sleep with paws facing the sky, so to prevent the sky falling down. So this is to them, to those Banis. The sky will not fall. Sleep tight, little Bani. And these are some poems that I wrote different years after I became an orphan. Good thing mother is no longer with us. This miserable days of mine, this world. She did not say I will come back soon, the last time Mom left. Tired so that still wouldn't rest what used to be Mom. It's hard to be an orphan, little puppy, even when you are old. When you escape a war and leave your country, you do not choose normally where to go. You just go wherever it is possible. And that is why there is a great chance you lose your beloved ones for quite a long time without knowing where they are. My family members now reside in 13 countries in 3 continents. So this is to all those who have lost the address of their beloved ones, including my friends, family members, my children. And now I don't even know from where on earth you orbit the sun. From this point on, I send my prayers to 4 sides and 6 directions. I now worry about the fate of entire world at all times. I fear asteroids will fall all over the earth. I think about the bus en route to the province of Gur and the explosion of hatred in the bazaar of Urgun. I worry about the war that might erupt in an island named too hard to pronounce, or the boat that might sink and drown all the smuggled immigrants inside. I worry about a bomb explosion on a London subway, or a plane hitting a skyscraper, or the callous thoughts of haters of the evil souls, the kind that lives in beautiful mansions or creepy caves. And from all the celestial gods, I now wish that they appoint an angel to guard your smile. My hands now hang on 2 sides like the worn out sleeves of a shirt hanging from a clothesline. Every functional piece inside me has stopped working, except for my expecting eyes and my heart that beats with fear that something terrible could be happening to you. And my lips that praise to all gods for your protection, because now everything is out of my hands. Thank you.
In this section of tonight's event, I'm interviewing Gavin Barrett, the author of Understand, published by Mowenzi House in 2020, a CBC Books recommendation. Gavin has been published in Joao Rocky Literary Journal, Fresh Voices, Ranjit Haskoti's anthology of 14 contemporary Indian poets, Reasons for Belonging, PEN India's Journal, The Folio, The Independent, the Toronto Review of Contemporary Writing, and Bombay Poetry Circle's Poesis and Eye to Eye. He curates the Tartan Turban Secret Readings, which promote Indigenous Black, people of color writers, and serves on the advisory board of the Canadian Authors Association's Toronto branch, and is board co-chair for immigrant journalism nonprofit New Canadian Media. Welcome to Happening Multicultural Festival 2022 Poetry Interviews. For this interview, we have managed to convince Gavin Barrett to join us. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Bänoo. Thank you, and thank you for having me as well. I'm very, very honored to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I know you have lots of wisdom and insight to share, and given the work that you have been doing in both as in your day job as well as in the poetry community. Now, I would like to just ask you by starting to ask you this question. Give us a little bit of a story about your journey as an immigrant poet. How has that been for you?
So I've been I immigrated to Canada in 1996. So it was 20 years. It was 25 years for me last year. Was it 20? Sorry, my math is terrible. But 1996 is when I immigrated to Canada, and when I arrived here, I went around the poetry reading scene, and the idea of diversity that existed at that time was very different than what we understand it to be today. And by that, let me explain. For example, I think if you found poets or writers of any kind who, for example, came from who were of Italian descent, they filled the diversity requirement of the time, and people say, "Oh yes, we've had. It's not just the usual kind, of writers we have had a few Italian writers, writers of Italian descent. We have had a few writers who are Irish, But so it was a very unusual definition of diversity. So certainly for a person like myself, who as a brown writer coming to Canada for the first time, and I didn't see anybody that looked like me at all in those circles. I found the writing interesting, and I found the writing entertaining, and I enjoyed attending the sessions. But I was not hearing poetry that reflected my experience or experiences like mine. It seemed to be like it was from a generation before. I don't mean in terms of quality, I just mean in terms of the content that was being covered. There was a new experience of what it means to be an immigrant in Canada, a new perspective, and I was certainly part of that experience, and I just wasn't seeing it. And I stopped attending readings as a result. I stopped participating in open mics. It seemed really difficult to get on as a featured reader anywhere, even though I was published. It it was a strange, I felt very disconnected. So that was my first experience. And I probably this is a good time to mention that I should acknowledge my privilege in all of this. I was an immigrant. I am an immigrant. I am brown, but English is my first language, which is a privilege. It's also a loss because I lost my native languages due to the forces of colonialism in my home country, India. But so I came with that ease of being an Anglophone poet, and I'm a man. I cannot begin to imagine what it must have been for immigrant poets who were women, who for whom English was not necessarily their first language, or it was their second or third language, that they were multilingual in. So I do have to acknowledge that in the mix, and yet at the same time, my experience was that I felt disconnected, separated, and unable to actually get in, to the extent that I finally stopped.
Wow. Yes, it's mixed, right? We talk about intersectional identities, right? So, some aspects of our identities let us in some places, and some of them keep us out, or like make us targets, basically, of
Absolutely.
different kinds of prejudice.
Absolutely.
Sexism, racism, homophobia, and whatnot, right?
And Bänoo, you must have, I'm sure you've experienced that yourself as an immigrant, as a woman. I mean, you're from a Muslim culture. All of these things, they intersect, but they also layer up, and sometimes the burden can be a heavy burden to carry. The more of the intersections you carry within yourself, the more challenging perhaps it becomes to navigate. And then, by the way, I must not forget to acknowledge this. The other part of the privilege is that in the process of being an immigrant, one becomes, in my case, certainly it was accidental, one becomes an accidental settler, and
yes,
I knew something of the history, before I immigrated, but not sufficiently, certainly not to the extent I've discovered, after my arrival here. So there is that, I slid in as an immigrant who was accepted, welcomed officially by the government of Canada. I slid into a position within a system that had been built by settlers that are directly connected to Canada's brutal colonial past. So there's that privilege, and that is another element to navigate when you are a person of color in this country. And I don't think one can ever separate oneself from that,
Absolutely. Now we're talking about intersectional identities. Let's continue in that vein. Well, we know, as we talked about, there are different minority groups in Canada. Sometimes immigrants have more, again, as part of their intersectional identities. Like an immigrant can be brown, black, LGBT, woman. However, what I want to ask you is, do you see any differences between immigrants and non-immigrants? Like, if in everything else being equal.
I think so. Because of my commercial work, I have to do a lot of thinking and detail work in terms of the data, in terms of the demographics, and understanding how population has changed. So first of all, we have to look at within immigrants and the children of immigrants, in this country. My children, my daughters are grown women, arrived here with me when they were infants. So they weren't born here, but they've pretty much grown up here. They feel very strongly connected to India, where we come from. And that is fortunate, and I'm happy for that. And at the same time, they feel very, very strongly connected to Canada. I, as an immigrant, do not feel, I think their discomfort is slightly different than my discomfort. And I shouldn't speak for my daughters because, or for any second generation, for the next generation, because they know what they have to navigate and they know what their difficulties are. But my difficulties, I can clearly see, are distinct from those who have been here many generations. I was sold on an idea of a Canada that wasn't quite the package that I was delivered when I arrived, in the sense that, we were told, we were expected to, Canada respected multiculturalism and diversity. We were not expected to lose our identity, to subsume our cultural identities. We could continue to be proud in them. And to a large extent, I understand that is the political philosophy of multiculturalism in Canada. The actual experience is not exactly that. Sometimes it can be very good. It can be very strongly that. And I've had the pleasure and privilege to have enjoyed that. But at other times, it can be the complete opposite of that, where, you have to be a model minority. You have to be grateful for being an immigrant. You shouldn't be critical. You shouldn't be, you shouldn't judge the country that has accepted you. And I have to say this, this is, I could have chosen. I had a choice of countries. Yes, I chose Canada. I didn't have to come here. Canada wanted me, as much as I wanted Canada. So I have every right, regardless just of the right in law, but every right to be as critical or as thoughtful or as happy to be here as anyone else. And if I'm unhappy, then I have a right to express my unhappiness and my dissatisfaction to make things better.
Exactly. I feel that, we are torn between different forces. One group wants us to praise the destination country. One group wants us to praise actually where we come from. And nobody wants to hear us being critical of both. That's very hard to take.
Absolutely. Why can't, in my case, why can't I be a good Indian and celebrate my Indian culture and trot it out at Diwali and Vaisakhi? Oh my goodness, it's too complex for people to understand that. First of all, I'm not a typical Indian in the sense that I come from a very small minority back in India. So, and that's very small minority. So I'm Indian, but I'm from the Catholic tradition. I'm half Goan, which were ruled by the Portuguese for 500 years. So I don't just have the English colonial past in my background or the Portuguese colonial past in my background. And Catholics in India are a very tiny and not often fairly treated minority in the Indian context. But that's a 20 million population. When I say it's a very tiny population, it's a very tiny minority. It's 20 million in India, which is, in the Canadian context, quite enormous.
Half of the country.
Yeah. And, yet when the expectation is that I'll be dressed a certain way or speak. I don't speak Punjabi at all. The part of India that I come from, Bombay, now called Mumbai, Punjabi is not a language spoken in Mumbai. We spoke the local language there, which is Marathi, and Hindi, which is language spoken in a lot of the northern half of the country, and English, of course, which was my mother tongue. And that, so if you're not fitting the box, you're not fitting that pigeonhole, then like people don't know where to slot you. So that's the first problem that you have. And then you're expected to behave a certain way, because you've been accepted as an immigrant. You have to accept with all its warts what you have been given. And actually, that's not the nature of democracy. It wasn't the nature of the democracy where I came from. And India is a massive democracy. It has lots of flaws and lots of criticism of those flaws by other Indians. And that, Bänoo, brings me to the other point you were making. Among Indians, there is this harshness of judgment. Fellow Indians will judge others for not being faithful to their backgrounds, or not being, and yet we have all chosen to be in another place, in a country far away. Things will change. Humans are constantly evolving, and we have to, and poets especially are constantly evolving.
Exactly, which brings me actually to the next point. Gavin, you and I have been here for more than a decade. Now, if there's a person who's new, a refugee, an immigrant, especially from a different linguistic background, how would you describe the literary scene, the poetry scene for that newcomer, aspiring writer or poet?
Well, it's hard to navigate. So the one of the most critical things that you said, Bänoo, was language. In that set of descriptions of intersecting, descriptions that many immigrants belong to. So I think it is very, very difficult to navigate the landscape if you're not either francophone or anglophone. I think if you are either francophone or anglophone, then it is an advantage, and you already enter with some privilege, as I was saying right at the start. But there are places of welcome. So the first thing I would say to anyone who is entering this literary landscape is to look for those places of welcome. They are hard to find. There are very few of them. I think what we have set out to do, Bänoo, you and I, in the reading series that we organize, is precisely to create those places of welcome, that did not exist for us, so that those who have come after us will find their place, and take their space, occupy that space in the Canadian literary context, because we have poems to share and stories to tell that are going to make the Canada that chose us, and the Canada that we chose, a vastly richer place than it was. And it was rich, but it's getting richer. And that's what we're here for.
Right. Yes, you're absolutely right. In that vein, I would like to continue the discussion. Do you have any more, let's say, tips, advice, suggestions for so-called success for newcomer poets and writers?
So,
on top of attending or finding those places of welcome.
Yeah, it's so the spaces of welcome are, it's simple enough to say, look for example, reading series like Shabi Sher, which you run, or Tartan Turbans Secret Readings, which I run. But it's more than just a place where there is a platform or a stage. It's also about finding community. So this is hard work. So I always pause before I give this as a suggestion, which is one of the things that you can do to find your way in, because it takes a little while to figure out how things are structured. It is foreign in many ways. Is to volunteer, because that lets you into communities that the gatekeepers of old typically kept people like us out of. But the gatekeepers of old need help. They're aging themselves. I'm not a young person, but I have a lot of energy, and I think we can the energy we bring, the vitality we bring, and the ability to be willing, just the willingness to work, is tremendously valuable, and is appreciated. So it allows us into spaces that are closed, and that is another technique, because we still have to break in. It's one thing to create our own spaces, which we have done, and I think that's essential. But we still also have the job of breaking down those walls and getting past those gates. So that is one way to do that, and then another way to do that is to add your voice as a voice of resistance or protest. I think it is, immigrants are shy naturally, especially when you're dealing with English as a second or third language. Uh, if you come from an Asian culture, you're usually more reserved, non-confrontational. These are all sort of, this is part of the cultural baggage we come with. And yet at the same time, we have participated in our own home countries in protests and in change and in bringing change. And we have greater freedoms very often when we come to Canada that we should be putting to work. So adding our voices to the call for change, to make sure that there are more editors that look like us, more agents that look like us, more jurors that look like us, more entries that come from people of color and people from all these intersecting sort of minority statuses. We have to ask for it to come. We have to protest for it. We have to demand it, and I think that's almost a duty. If you are conscious as a writer, you have to do that work. And I'm sorry if that is a burden on immigrants. I feel bad.
I don't think it's a burden, actually. I think you either have to accept the status quo or change it. We did that back home. We do that here. Not different. And those people who make their mark are the people who take it upon themselves to change the world around them. And the world needs to be changed in so many different directions that not Absolutely. One person or one group is responsible for making the world better for the rest of us.
Absolutely.
That's how I see it.
I was saying to another poet, actually, I was saying to Amma Ede, who's curating the next Art and Turban readings, we're the barbarians at the gate. we are hammering with our fists on the gate, and we're demanding to be let in. But we're not going to stop doing all the other things that we're doing. So, he, in his case, for example, he runs the Maple Tree Literary Supplement, which is incredible. He didn't wait around waiting to be let in. He went ahead and did something. So we're all doing that. You and I with our reading series, for example. The other thing is, of course, is you never stop your work of writing. That work carries on. The old phrase is living well is the best revenge. Maybe the phrase should be adapted to writing well is the best revenge. So you write your heart out, you write better and better, you grow your craft. Nothing that happens to you is a reason to pause and to allow oneself to be victimized. We will be occasionally victims or often victims, but I refuse to let that beat me. I will continue doing the work I have to do, and that includes my own writing. So,
exactly, that's so well spoken. Coming from someone who is like you, and I would consider is leaving your mark on this society. This is so well spoken. Thank you so much. Well, anything else you would like to say to immigrants, immigrant poets, immigrant artists? Do you have a question for me, for example?
I think, Bänoo, I do have a question for you, actually.
Right.
I'd like to hear your because I know you were a professor of English literature, right, back home in Iran. So you were strong in the world, the literary world, the understanding of the literary world, and yet when you and I have spoken, I know that you have said that your early years were very tough, right? And I'd like to know, and you have other intersections, like I spoke about being a man, and that brings me privilege, and I'm Anglophone, even though I'm brown. But if you could layer in your, I think, your experience, that would be amazing, because you get to see how difficult or challenging it can be.
Yeah,
Would you
I
be
mean,
okay with sharing some of
yeah,
that?
absolutely. As you said, I was back home. I was a kind of because Iranians are very biased towards our own culture and language. So as a person who studied another literature and another language, it wasn't easy for me to be accepted into the, let's say, Persian language um, world, and it isn't still. Like even here, I would say that the Persian community has rarely ever acknowledged me here. Now, the other aspect is I've always been a feminist and a woman, and with that awareness, which in patriarchal societies, both in Iran and here in Canada, puts you in kinds of conflicts against the mainstream, represented mostly by men, but sometimes even by women. Now, again, what a lot of times people have their own perceptions of you. Like they look at me and they think I come from a Muslim majority country, so they want me to make a statement against my government, or what they see as against my government. They want me, and if I have a more nuanced response, it is not appreciated. It is not appreciated by people here, and it's not even appreciated by my own community, because again, they want to see everything black and white, the same mistake that we did at the beginning of the Islamic Revolution. We just knew we didn't want the Shah. We didn't know who we wanted instead of him.
Anything was better.
Where we are now, right? So these kinds of superficial statements and positions are always expected from people, and of course, being a woman also makes you a target of unwanted attention of different kinds. So when I went, I was old enough. I was in my 40s. So when I started going to poetry events and different literary events, I was aware that I would be targeted, and I just didn't want to send that message. And that was also one of the other issues that I had. I had actually a manifesto, Immigrant Writers Manifesto, which is published by Immigrant Writers Association, and in which I give a lot of suggestions for survival and success to a lot of them are the ones that you talked about, but a lot of them talk about separating the personal from the professional. If you go to poetry events, if you go look at it as another profession, don't mix emotions, don't mix romantic expectations, because for immigrants, you have to pay more, especially as a woman. It costs a lot. So you have to pick, either you're going into those communities to pick a lover, or you want to be known as a poet. You have to be clear about that, so and so on and so forth. But what an amazing conversation this has been. I just want to thank you for accepting this invite, and I want to, again, if you have more questions, go ahead, but if not, make your last observation, comment, suggestion, anything you think we need to know.
Okay, thank you. Again, it's been, I've enjoyed doing this so much. So thank you for having me. Thank you for even thinking of me. And there you go. I'm grateful to be thought of, and that's almost part of the experience, that we're, oh my goodness, somebody remembered me. I exist. So you're automatically grateful, and that's the truth, because we're not often remembered. So when we are remembered, I think gratitude is appropriate. So thank you for that. I do think that especially poetry is deeply confessional. So poets have a tougher job to do in terms of separating the professional from the personal, because let's say you're at a reading, you're reading a poem. You're not reading usually a poem about somebody else. You're usually reading a poem that's about yourself. And yes, you will be exposed. You become vulnerable in that moment immediately. So yes, take every precaution you can to protect yourself. You know, your vulnerability is a superpower that you need for your poetry to be able to access the power that poetry has. But your vulnerability should, should be acknowledged by yourself so that you can take care of yourself and protect yourself as you navigate the world. So that, I would say, is to be done. Go with love for yourself first, and do what follows naturally, and don't bother meeting expectations. Drop any regard for expectations. Be loud, be noisy, be grateful, be ungrateful, uh, you know, uh, demand, be demanding, as much as you need to be, uh, and enjoy the ability to be free to criticize who you are yourself and where you are now and where you came from equally, uh, as you criticize anyone else or anything else. Uh, it's the duty of truth that a poet carries, for sure. I think almost every writer carries some of that as a pact that they make, an unspoken, unwritten pact they make with their readers. So if the truth isn't there in the work, you will have failed your work. So you might as well do it for the sake of the work, if nothing else.
Oh my
That's
God,
it for me.
that has been amazing, this conversation and all the golden pieces of advice that you've given us. Thank you. And I should say, I am also grateful that you accepted and you shared with us your fellow immigrants on the same journey. You shared with us your insight, your experience, your joy, and your challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bänoo, and thank you, Happening, for having me.
Thank you. We continue tonight's event with Hua Nguyen. Hua Nguyen is the author of several books, including Red Juice, Poems from 1998 to 2008, and the Griffin Prize nominated Violet Energy Ingots. Her latest collection of poems, 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure, published by Wave Books, was a finalist for a 2021 National Book Award and Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry. A well-regarded and popular teacher of creative writing, Hua is associated with several writing programs, including the Milton Avery School for the Fine Arts at Bard College. In 2019, her body of work was nominated for a Neustadt Prize for Literature, a prestigious international literary award often compared with the Nobel Prize in Literature. Born in the Mekong Delta and raised and educated in the United States, Hua lives in Toronto with her family.
Hi, I'm Hua Nguyen, and I will be reading from 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure. This is a book that came out during the pandemic in 2021 from Wave Books. This first poem is Seeds and Crumbs. Yes, a famous mise-en-scène. When I was just a little girl, Angle looks too much like angel and vice versa. What lies ahead? Rainbow. Rainbows, who cares? Scatter the song, clavichord it. The future's not ours to see. Tenderly. Warm rain. Rain is a blessing from God, she said, covered in hose water and mud, washed out Washington, D.C. stars, night sky, exit window to low roof, 1,000 miles away, wall scene hand-painted on rice paper. She knew her worth, the halo born. Buddha blessed she was. Precipitation, act or fact of falling, headlong. Last letter, 17 March 73. Dear sister, I want you to know that the money you sent, $100 to my mother, I hadn't been able to withdraw from the bank. At the bank, they said they had to check with the bank in the US to make sure that the amount had been transferred to such a person and that it is available in the account. So right now, all that my mother has in the bank is a receipt that she should come back in a month to Saigon to withdraw the money, but I'm not sure how much she will get. I received the letter and photographs and gave the letter to Ko-Ut. In 2 days, it will be the anniversary of my father's passing, and so I'm letting you know this so you won't be expecting a letter anytime soon, and I'll tell you about the money and how much the bank gave us. In the meanwhile, I hope everyone is happy, healthy, and that the children are growing up steadily and are nice kids, and that you will always be this beautiful lady. We are concerned and in good health. Talk to you in another letter, unsigned. This next poem is a sonnet called Durian Sonnet. Durian, of course, being the famously pungent fruit native to Southeast Asia. It's called Durian Sonnet in that it's a sonnet, but durian only makes a small appearance in it. Durian Sonnet. I lost this sonnet once, I may lose it again. I wore the design described as concealment and surprise, the split sides and hugged features. You had to lift your arms out for the poster photograph. You had to leave your arms out to show your circus daring, to say you chose this, to say you are flying on the small French motorbike, hair also flying, and a glamour shot smile. I ask Dieppe to tell me who they are, the women pictured in black and white, colorful stripes, 5 in the all-woman motorcycle troupe. Durian translates as private sorrow. She says, I think she's dead. I don't know what happened to her. She killed herself. I don't know what happened to her. This next poem from 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure is a transcription of a folk opera that was performed in the late 60s in North Vietnam as filmed in the documentary Far From Vietnam, a collaborative production from the experimental filmmakers in France at the time called Far From Vietnam. So this is the transcription of the Vietnamese translated into French, translated into English. The opera is called Oh My 4 FH Planes, Cries of Johnson, a folk opera. Folk operas, of course, being a popular theater form to the culture of Vietnam. Here, the players were North Vietnamese sympathetic playwrights and performers. Oh My 4 FH Planes, Cries of Johnson, a folk opera. Born phantoms, we have become phantoms. O you powerful thunder chief, God of thunder himself, thunderstruck. O crusaders, O flying sabers, O sky raiders, O sky runners, you have returned to the sky. O U.S. Air Force, if the gods love you, find your way back to America. Thus cries our poor Johnson, and we tell him, pirates always receive the deserved punishment, the deserved punishment. Enraged, you still bite like an unrelenting blind player. If you have any spirit left, go back home, go back home. Transplants. So we are poor people, transplants halfway around the planet, photographs destroyed or hid from authorities. Who am I to you, statue who shimmers like history? What happens when fate happens? What fate? Hand-painted lacquer kitten heels. We had abortions. She won't let you record a boat crossing water propelled by long crossed paddles. And no, I don't want to conduct my lie research and produce it for you here, dear reader. Here we see a different metal, guns pointed to a decommissioned cannon. On the farm, her aunt returned from Patty's to nurse the baby. Milk soaks her shirt. We won't be rescued by self-serving benevolence and holy books. Lost woman-looking woman cries and wanders, the common trauma aftermath of any person walking and crying. Yes, I hate this poem too. And this is the last poem, another sonnet called Sacred Ficus Sonnet. Sacred ficus being the variety of trees that are common to Southeast Asia, also called strangler fig. They're enormous with these large exterior aerial roots. Sacred Ficus Sonnet. Cinched belt tugged tight around the heart, 5 or 6 aerial roots dangling. A strangler fig. Do homeless ancestors live inside the tree? Child of noise, hold the loosened ends. You may miss the moon or fall in love with it. Embrace ashes. I too am far removed of thirst that wanders thirsting. And I could never ask the name of the boy who died, a baby boy who died, but what could you do? And maybe words hang in sinew and care, writer of dead words or living words in life's hammer. Encase the host tree and erase it. I don't know the folk songs on farms far from here, the dead, buried and gone, to dig the graves. Who dug the graves, darling? The sea widens for you tonight and deepens. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of tonight's show. Huge thanks to our poets, to the festival team, Paula Gomez, Paula Sofia Morales, Natalia Rus, Alex Oscuyano, and all the other volunteers working hard behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.